one right way of taking naltrexone, and doctors are prescribing it wrong, and that's why it doesn't work for people. And it turns out that that's just not true. There are different ways of taking it. Taking it daily works for some people. I don't think it would have worked for me because I still had side effects from the medication. I just didn't like the way that naltrexone feels. And that was one of the things that pushed me towards sobriety was like, after a while, when I wasn't getting any pleasure from alcohol, being able to make that calculation, do I want to have a drink? It's not going to feel that good, and I'm going to take this pill that I don't particularly like taking. Is it worth it? And I was able to say at the end, like, no, it's not worth it. In the beginning.
Welcome, everybody. It's Katie with Thrive Alcohol Recovery, and today I have a very, very special guest with me. Today I have with me Katie Herzog, who is a writer, and not just any, like, you are such a good writer. Everything I've read from you makes me laugh. It strikes me emotionally. It's convincing and convicting. So you're a writer, you're a podcaster, and you are coming out with this new book called, drumroll, Drink Your Way Sober. The science-based method to break free from alcohol addiction or from alcohol, excuse me. And big surprise, it's about naltrexone and the Sinclair Method. So we're going to talk about that today. It hasn't come out yet. We're recording this on September 17, 2025, but it's coming out on the 30th of this month, I do believe. So Katie, and I think I neglected to mention you're a Sinclair Method success story as well, which is why you've written this book. So first of all, just thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is my honor. I've been following you for years now. You were absolutely instrumental in writing the book. You are like you and Claudia, I think really have done as much to spread awareness and help people through this as absolutely anybody.
Well, thank you. I mean, I feel very fortunate that you've kind of involved me in this process as you have. So thank you so much. And I don't know why I waited so long to reach out to you. It's like on my mind to ask you to come on sooner, but I mean, I'm glad we're talking now because the book has been in the works for a while. And what's interesting with you, I'm, part of your TSM journey is you were writing about your experience, but you did so anonymously under a pseudonym because you weren't totally comfortable coming out, understandably so, with your story, given that you're kind of a public facing person. But over time, you clearly got more confident to talk about your struggles with alcohol. So I want to talk about that a bit today, but can we just start, like, people love to hear the story of your alcohol use issues, and your story is so fascinating. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your history with alcohol and what it is that led you to TSM?
Yeah, so I started drinking young. I think I was 12, maybe 13 when I had my first drink. And I drank in high school. I'm from a kind of a rural area in North Carolina. And so in high school, it was like keg parties in some farmer's field, burning tires, shit like that. And then so I drank a lot. It was a very typical like 90s upbringing. I think our generation, I think I'm a little bit older than you, but of our sort of very like basic age group, incredibly normal to start drinking in high school. And then in college, I drank more. That was kind of one of the things I really loved about college. I don't remember much of the actual scholastic experience, but I really loved drinking. I loved the freedom of it. And, when I got my first like off-campus apartment when I was 19 or house when I was 19, I loved nothing more than to like sit on my porch and day drink by myself and chain smoke cigarettes and read the New Yorker. I loved it. And if like that could have been my life, I probably would have been pretty happy. It's just that unfortunately there's some like negative repercussions that come with chronic alcohol use, as we all know. And then I just never stopped. So after college, a lot of my peers from college, like my cohort of friends, we all sort of moved away from where we gone to college, or most of us did. And kind of most of my friends kind of gradually got their shit together over the next few years. And I was just a complete barfly. So I had trouble holding on to jobs because I was hungover all the time. I just could not, like, if my job required me to be at work before noon, it was going to be a problem. And I mostly worked at coffee shops, which typically open before noon. So I struggled with stuff like that. I really was stuck in this kind of entry level job loop of getting fired or quitting jobs because I just couldn't hack it. I went to grad school for a year. I dropped out of that because I was spending all of my time at the bar and all of my money at the bar. So I was a barfly. Um, and I was pretty good at it. Like I was super social. All of my friends within my community were barflies. I was pretty happy, honestly, except for the fact that my life was very much in disarray because of my drinking. I got in all sorts of trouble. It's pretty shocking that I never got in legal trouble. But pretty much everything else, like work trouble, relationship trouble, school trouble, all of those signs, like if I, and I did this all the time, sort of, you find those surveys online put out by public health organizations about like evaluating your own drinking. Has alcohol got in the way of school or work? And it was like check, check, check. I had every marker for alcohol use disorder. And I lived like that for a really long time. So I realized that I had a drinking problem when I was in my early 20s, but I didn't. At first, I went to AA, but it just wasn't a very good fit for me. And I think the reason was because AA couldn't address the cravings themselves. I wanted to keep drinking and I wanted a solution that would let me keep drinking. And it wasn't until I found the Sinclair method many years later that I realized that that solution could possibly exist and that it could work for me. But it took me a long time to find it, a lot of experimentation, a lot of struggle and heartache, and the Sinclair method was not immediately effective for me. So I first took naltrexone in like 2018 and had like pretty negative side effects. So I took it one time and then was like, this isn't going to work for me. And it wasn't until years later, like 4 years later during COVID, when I was in a position where I was like, okay, this is kind of last ditch effort. I have to do something. And I tried it again. And that time I had armed myself for a lot with a lot more information. So I knew that I should start with a low dose, titrate up. I started at 12 and a half milligrams, ate it with a full, or took the pill on a full stomach, full glass of water. By that point, I'd been following you. I'd been in the Facebook group. So I was just a lot better informed than I was the first time around. And I took it really seriously. I was super regimented about it. And it worked for me. I actively took naltrexone for 7 months. And then I took 2 months off of drinking. I declared extinction at 9 months. And then I haven't had a drink since. And it's been 3 years.
That's incredible. And like you touched on a bit of your story, and I just want to mention, like, I was lucky enough to read a copy of your book. And, this book is so unique because not only is it talking about the science of TSM and best practices, but also different ways to use naltrexone. And then your story is just woven into it so brilliantly. So people definitely get a glimpse into the very dark side of your drinking, which you also put like a humorous spin on, which makes it so entertaining and interesting. I found myself literally laughing out loud as I read it. So just
Okay,
wanted
thank
to
you.
mention, yeah, you're, like I said, you're such a good writer, and you just have a really good way of weaving in humor to something that a lot of us carry a lot of shame
Yeah.
around and secrecy.
Totally. Well, that's one of the things I really actually do like about AA. AA can be a sort of open mic. There are lots of things I don't like about AA, but I actually started after I successfully did TSM and had been sober for like a year. I started going to AA meetings. I don't go with any regularity. I'll sort of drop into them sometimes. But one of the things I like is that oftentimes you hear, drinkers can be really good storytellers. And then you go back the next day and it's the same people telling the same stories. But yeah, I mean, I think we all know that as dark as 80 you can be, there's also moments of levity.
Yeah. Um, that's so true. And I think it's helpful to, I mean, I think the further we get from it, the more we can laugh at it. Sometimes I like shudder in horror at some of the
Oh,
things I went
totally.
through. Like you
Totally.
said, you didn't get in you didn't get in trouble with the law, thankfully. That could have happened, certainly for me too. Um, part of your story, which people will learn about more in the book, but I think this resonates with a lot of people that struggle with alcohol, is that you drank a lot in secret.
Yes.
And I think there was even a time where people thought you were sober, but you were really not sober. So, can you talk about that experience of struggling with alcohol, getting in recovery, but continuing to drink in secret and hiding it from people in your life?
I basically lived a double life where people I drank with knew that I was a heavy drinker, and everybody else in my life thought that I was sober, and then including my family, including my wife, my now wife. And and then in COVID, when sort of the bars shut down and I was at home. It was like the only people who knew were like the woman who ran the 7-Eleven down the street or the various 7-Elevens that I would go to because I was always I didn't want to go to the same one 2 days in a row because I didn't want her to know. And it's so funny, I interviewed a ton of people for this book, and you've talked to so many people who suffer from ADU, and our stories, like there are these certain things like that, things like avoiding going to the same store 2 days in a row, staggering your purchasing habits, drinking in secret, the sort of lies that we told people. There's so many commonalities among so many of our stories. But yeah, I hit it, and I hit it really well. I was never busted. And people who don't have any familiarity with addiction, I think find it very hard to believe when I say that, like, I hid this successfully for years and years and years. I don't know what to tell them. Like, I did. And this is not because my family and friends and my spouse are particularly gullible, or like that's not a reflection on them. It's a reflection on me. And I tell people, like, you wouldn't have known either. Nobody knew. And so this is something that I think alcoholics or people with ADU sort of understand. Like, you can hide it for a while, sometimes for long periods of time if you're very savvy about it. And I think it was easier for me to hide it because, like, when I met my wife, I did not want her to know the extent of my drinking. So I very rarely drank around her, even when we were first getting together. And so she didn't know what I was like drunk, right? It wasn't like she had seen me I didn't meet her until I was in my mid 30s. It wasn't like she had seen all of those years of partying. And so I kept these parts of my life very separate. So she didn't even know what to look for, right? And I was able to not drink around her. I drank when she was at work or when she was out or out of town. And so it's hard to explain, I guess, but she never would have, it would have been like suspecting that was like a heroin addict. Like, it would have been so out of character. She wouldn't have had any reason to believe that I was doing this thing because I just never did it around her.
100%. And you talk about that more in detail in the book about kind of your strategies of hiding in. I too hid it from my husband, and he doesn't have a drinking problem. I'm assuming your
Hmm.
wife doesn't either.
Not at all.
So, like you said, they don't know what to look for. Like,
It
it's
wouldn't,
not like,
yeah. It wouldn't have occurred to her. And she hasn't spent a lot of time around heavy drinkers. Like her friends younger partied, but there's no addiction in her family. It's not a part of her life. It just didn't even occur to her. And that's
yeah.
not, and like, it's the one thing that, like, I did one interview, and someone was sort of like, kind of not shitting on my wife, but like, your life must, like, well, what's wrong with your wife? She didn't know. And that kind of made me mad because I'm like, it's not about her. It's about me.
We are very clever and very savvy. I
Yes,
was so good at like, and it almost makes it a game. Like, how can I
totally.
secretly sneak this behind my husband's back? And
Yes.
he didn't know. And he knew
So,
I drank, but
yeah. So when did you kind of come clean to him?
about a month or two after starting TSM. Like, he
Okay.
knew
So
I
you
would
started
drink.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. I would drink it. I would get drunk in front of him sometimes, but I'd be like, oh, I must have not eaten, or like would just chalk it up to, oops, silly me. Not like, oh, I've been drinking since 11 a.m. and it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm wasted and you didn't know.
Uh,
So yeah, it's absolutely not a reflection on our family members because they, like you said, they don't know what to look for. And I
right.
think if I was in a relationship with a drinker, maybe I would be able to tell because
Yes.
I know all the tips and
Yes.
tricks.
Totally.
But
Totally. Yeah. I think I can tell. I think I would be, yeah. Although then again, it's like maybe not. Maybe we too would be fooled, but I think I just know what to look for. And I can tell when I'm around drunk people. I feel like I can tell I think I can tell when people have a problem by the way that they drink. And I might be completely fooling myself, but I think that I have enough experience being around heavy drinkers, my own experience, that I just have a lot more insight than somebody who has always been a casual drinker or a non-drinker.
yeah, totally. Um, Wanted to quickly go back to AA because I was curious. You were attending it after TSM, and were they at all open to TSM, or did you talk to them about TSM or naltrexone? No. Okay, just
No,
want to
I
clarify.
didn't talk about it. Felt like I was of sort of mixed minds about it because so basically what happened is that I did TSM. I was totally sober for like a year. I finally told my wife, oh, we moved. We bought a house in the town where I'd gone to college. And so when we moved back there, I and this is 20 years after I went to school, so it's not like I had a lot of friends sort of left from that era. And honestly, like probably some of those relationships would have failed anyway because of things that I did when I was drinking 20 years before that are still in people's minds. And so, but I wanted to make friends. And so I was like, where can I find sober friends? Because my way of making friends in the past had always been through bars, and I was very good at it at bars, not so much outside of alcohol. And so I started going to AA, and I enjoyed the meetings in a way that I hadn't when I was actively fighting ADU because I didn't feel that pressure. There wasn't this like stress of like, am I going to drink? I want to drink. I can't drink. I'm here. I feel so ashamed of my alcoholism. I'm not like these people. I'm different, you know. And so in the early days when I was trying to get sober in my 20s and 30s and I would go to meetings, oftentimes I would go from a meeting to a bar. I also found that some of the rhetoric like giving up your power, like admitting that you're powerless, I found that rhetoric sort of counterproductive because I wanted to feel like I had power over my life. I clearly didn't, but I wanted to feel that way. Anyway, so when I went back to AA years later after I was sober, the meetings were totally enjoyable. I made some connections and spoke to people, but the one time I like approached the subject of TSM, I wasn't shut down, but the person I told was just very confused. And so it to me was like this isn't appropriate. And then one of the reasons I decided to write the book was as a direct result of going to these meetings because I would go to these meetings and I would hear these people share who had some of them were newly sober, some of them had been sober for years and they were still fighting cravings. They were still stuck in this loop of the obsessive mental loop. And that was so not my experience. I feel free from the burden of addiction. I do not even feel like I'm in recovery. I feel like I am recovered. And I had this, I wanted to like stand up and be like, Heart, take this pill and follow me to the bar. But I knew I would sound totally psychotic if I said that. I just didn't feel like it was welcome. It was against sort of the ethos of the program. But that's one of the reasons I decided to write the book was because I would just go to these meetings and I was like, "You people aren't free." Some of them were. I mean, and you don't knock AA. I don't knock AA. It absolutely works for a lot of people, but I felt like some of these people in these meetings who are really struggle with the sort of physical cravings of alcohol and the mental obsession might benefit from this program and they don't know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally understand why you wouldn't want to say it because the comments I get on my videos are like, oh, so you're just telling someone in recovery to start drinking again. And
Yeah.
you and I, like, we would never want to sabotage someone's recovery just to drink. But if you're in that
No.
place and the craving, like the people I know who come out of AA and do TSM, it's because of what you just said. It's like,
Yeah.
I knew I was going to relapse. Like the craving was too
Yes.
much, or like you
Yes.
going to a meeting and then do a bar afterward. I hear that all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the book, I think I say like this is not for people who are happily abstinent. Like if you are abstinent, if you are in the program or you have just quit on your own or whatever, and that works for you, I would never recommend that someone start TSM just like because for shits and giggles. Like if what you're doing works for you, this program is for people who whatever they're doing, it's not working.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you talk in the book too about different ways to use naltrexone. Sometimes people use it to help with abstinence. I get those. I used to be like very TSM only. That's the only way to
Yes.
use naltrexone. But I cannot deny the probably thousands by now of comments I've gotten like, oh, I've been on naltrexone for 2 years and I haven't drank. And it's like amazing. It's an
Yeah.
anti-craving medication for some.
Yeah. That's one of the things that really surprised me when I was writing the book. And it made writing the book a lot more complex because the message that I had sort of absorbed from the TSM community before going into this was that there's one right way of taking naltrexone and doctors are prescribing it wrong and that's why it doesn't work for people and it turns out that that's just not true. There are different ways of taking it. Taking it daily works for some people. I don't think it would have worked for me because I still had side effects from the medication. I just didn't like the way that naltrexone feels. And that was one of the things that pushed me towards sobriety was like, after a while, when I wasn't getting any pleasure from alcohol, having being able to make that calculation, do I want to have a drink? It's not going to feel that good, and I'm gonna take this pill that I don't particularly like taking. Is it worth it? And I was able to say at the end, like, no, it's not worth it. In the beginning, yes, it was worth it because the desire for the drink was greater than the desire to not take the pill. Not that, I mean, my side effects were, I think they were worse than most people's, but it was still fairly minimal.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I talked to people when I was writing the book who did daily and that worked for them. I talked to people who took Vivitrol and that worked. I talked to people who did both, who would take it daily and then take another pill in anticipation of a heavy drinking session. I talked to people, the most interesting to me was people who don't consider themselves problem drinkers, but maybe a few times a year they drink too much at like the office holiday party or some occasion when they have a pattern of like blacking out or just embarrassing themselves. And so in general, like on a weekly basis, not a problem, but they just wanted to prevent sort of those embarrassing moments. And so they had some naltrexone on hand and would just take it before these sort of, before a wedding or a bachelor party or something like that. And that worked for them. And I was completely surprised because I went into this thinking there was one right way of doing it.
Yeah. And I think you do such a good job in the book because I remember when you were writing, you were like, oh my gosh, this is so much more than I thought it would be because of there isn't just one right and only way to do it. And even though that's the path that worked for you, and I too, I don't think the daily would have helped for me because I wanted to drink. Had a doctor told me, take this and don't drink, I
Right.
probably wouldn't have done it,
Right.
the
Totally.
ability to keep drinking. But
That
yeah,
was the key.
mm-hmm. Just want to clarify. I think earlier you said ADU, and I think you mean AUD. And
Oh,
just for
yes.
people watching, AUD is
Yes.
alcohol use disorder.
Yes, ADU is accessory dwelling unit, very different things.
Yeah, just want to clarify for people because sometimes people don't know what AUD is either.
I just
So
moved into a house with an ADU, and so it's been on my mind lately.
I love it. Um, okay, want to pause real quick and talk about your side effects a bit if you don't mind, because sometimes that's a huge deterrent for people. They stop, they give up, they aren't willing to endure. And I know for you, they were very unpleasant and you endured. So how did you endure? What was the mindset you had to keep pushing through? Because I know you've talked about how unpleasant they were. So how did you approach that for people who may be struggling with the side effects?
Yeah, so sort of the worst side effect for me was a little bit of nausea. And I do mean a little bit, like less nausea than like your average hangover. I would feel sort of foggy, almost stoned, but not really in a pleasant way, really tired. I yawned a lot and I had like weird compulsions to stretch. Um, And so I started out, as I said, on a low dose. I found that really helpful. I think it was you who told me about microdosing. So I did that a little bit. That microdosing was helpful later when I would go through longer periods of abstinence. Like if I was going to take a week off and then I needed to go in, and then I was going to do an extinction session and I was worried about the side effects. I would microdose a couple nights in advance of the heavier drinking session, and that was helpful. And that was just, you take a 50 milligram pill, drop it in 50 milliliters of distilled water, and then just put a little bit on your tongue. It like tastes bad, but it's fine. So I found that really helpful. I never took over-the-counter anti-nausea medication, but I know that works for some people. And the side effects, they lessened over time. So I would say that the side effects were, for a week or so, they were bad. And then they got less sort of every time that I took it. And then in terms of kind of just my attitude about, I persisted basically because this was my last option before coming clean and going to rehab. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to come clean. I didn't want to go to rehab. I couldn't have afforded rehab. Um, and so I just thought I have to change my life. Things are really bad. And if this is the least bad option, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and that motivation to change is just so vital to be able to endure the discomfort of the side effects.
Totally. Yeah, and I just, I told myself this is never going to be as bad. Like as your average Sunday morning hangover. And some people do get nallovers or they say that their hangovers are worse even if they're drinking less on naltrexone. I never really experienced terrible hangovers on naltrexone. That might have made it harder for me. But just I think by the time I did it, I had been drinking at that point for problem drinking at that point for 20 years, drinking at that point for my God, most of my life. And it was just, I was sick and tired. And as they say in AA, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And this was going to be the easiest way out as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. So you started TSM in secret, and I think I remember part of your story is like your wife during COVID, if I'm not mistaken, she was like working a lot because
Yeah, she's a nurse.
she's a nurse, yeah. So you were like at home drinking a lot because she was gone all the time, but then you started TSM in that same environment. Can you talk about kind of your introduction to TSM? And I mean, you kept it a secret for so long. I remember like hearing your story and I was like, that is such a burden that she has on her shoulders. Like
Yeah.
her drinking is a secret, TSM is a secret, but I totally understand why you did that. And I'm so proud of you for coming clean. So anyway, I just want to hear more about the kind of introduction to TSM and, being super secret about it.
Yeah, you were one of the like a small handful of people in the world who knew I was doing this because I interviewed you about it. So I, as I said before, so I discovered TSM or I started the first time in 2018, I believe, and then sat on the pills. I still had them in my cabinet because I just took them the one time, and didn't like the side effects. And then so during COVID, like 2 years into COVID, my drinking, I basically, every time my wife went to work, I was drinking. And it started out, in the like late afternoon or evening. And then the time of the day that I devoted to drinking just got progressively longer. And it was interfering in my life in every kind of way that you can imagine. So, my day was dictated by when, how much, and how much I could drink, and when I was going to stop drinking. And so, like, I was laid off from my job in the beginning of COVID. I was a journalist at a local paper in Seattle. So I was at home doing freelance work. I'd started a podcast and just doing my work. Like, I basically could work from, like 9 in the morning until noon. And then the rest of my day was going to be devoted to drinking. So if like my podcast partner wanted to record at 3 in the afternoon, hell no. Because those were my drinking hours, so just sort of small things like that. Just, I guess it's not a small thing. It was like really dictating my day. If my wife was getting off of work and she took a ferry into work. I couldn't pick her up from the ferry because I was drinking, so I'm telling her like, up, I got a meeting or whatever. You better ride your bike or take the bus. So stuff like that. She would go to an event with her family or friends. I wouldn't go because that's an excuse to stay home and drink by myself. So I just got increasingly like my life just got dictated by this desire to drink every fucking second that I could. It got to the point where like if she was gonna run out to the store and was gonna be gone for 30 minutes, like I'm outside on the porch like pounding booze and chain smoking and then jumping in the shower in the middle of the day before she got back. And I was having the physical effects of over drinking. So I felt physically awful all the time. I gained weight. I looked like shit. My skin looked bad. I was waking up every night or every morning at 3:30 in the morning, totally racked with shame, night sweats. I had so much anxiety about my health. So I just lived like that for 2 years. And then when I finally started TSM again, and there was no like, it was sort of a gradual process. Like things in my life at that point, I wasn't in my 20s. I wasn't like going out and getting wasted and driving. I wasn't getting in legal trouble. I wasn't getting in trouble at work anymore. So all of the consequences were pretty private and more like mental and emotional than they were sort of embarrassing myself in public because I like at that by that point in my life, my drinking had was basically a solo activity, a private solo activity. Um, so yeah, so at some point, and I think the precipitating factor that was finally like, okay, you have to do something was I woke up from like a sleep. I woke up peeing in my backyard. And I don't, I had like blacked out the night before and I like got up in the middle of the night. I got up, I like walked towards the bathroom. The door was shut. I banged my head into the bathroom door. And my wife woke up when I did this and she watched me like walk into the bathroom door, hit the bathroom door, and then walk outside and then just drop my shorts and just like pee against a tree, you know? And I woke up when I came to when she was like, shaking my shoulder. And yeah, so I think that was the precipitating event that I was like, this is something got to give. Not even, then that's like a pretty small rock bottom compared to every other rock bottom I had had in my life.
Can I just ask, like, how did you, and these are the type of stories, by the way, that are in the book where you just like cringe, but also laugh reading it because your writing style. But what was your excuse? Like, oh, I'm
Sleepwalking.
sleepwalking. Yeah.
Sleepwalking.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I think I had done this years earlier when I was living alone and there were like friends staying at my house and they said we went out drinking that night and they said the next day they told me that I got up in the middle of the night, walked into the living room. They were sleeping on like an air mattress on my living room floor, tripped over the air mattress, landed on them, got up and walked into the kitchen and peed in a trash can. And I had no memory of any of this. No memory. I'm still not sure they weren't fucking with me. Um, but yeah, I think like vast swaths of my 20s and 30s are just like
Wow.
they might as well not have happened. I don't have any recollection of years of my life.
Wow. Um, yeah, I wanted to ask you about your introduction to TSM, but just you mentioning that you don't like have recollection of 20s and 30s. Sometimes people have a lot of shame and guilt and regret for that. Like they're like, I wasted so many years drinking. Do you have
Yeah.
that or how do you deal with that?
I do have that, but I also, everything that I've done has gotten me to the place that I am in my life now, which is really good. My life is so much better than I ever would have expected it to be. And in some ways, I'm like, well, it could have been like this 10 years earlier. But I think I needed all of those steps to get me where I am today. And I'm really happy and healthy and, you know, I make a living doing what I want to do. I don't have a boss anymore. So, and I'm not sure any of that would have happened if I hadn't lived my life in exactly the way that I lived it.
Yeah, now your book, I mean, your book's going to help so many people and reach so many people. And you just telling your story, like putting your face out there, which is something I also want to ask you about because initially you weren't planning to do that. But first,
Mhm.
um, let me hear about your early TSM days and like the progress you saw. You were on it for 7 months. So, what did that progression and journey look like for you?
Yeah, so I started out basically drinking as much as I had before, and my consumption habits were I drank during COVID. I was drinking like at least a six pack of tall boys a day, and first time I took the pill, I I started out 12 and a half milligrams. So I ate a full meal or as much as, I ever ate a full meal when I was drinking, which was always like very hard for me to choke down food when I was drinking. I really didn't like food was, I, I really thought of food as like a necessary evil. Now I very much enjoy food, but for most of my adult life, like if I had been given the option to take a pill instead of eating, I would have done it because eating got in the way of drinking. Um, eating like food was something just to soak up the alcohol for the most part. And so the first weeks, I didn't see a lot of change. Like the first session, I think I still drank, five or six drinks. They weren't as fun. I definitely noticed that immediately that I wasn't having that sort of euphoria that I was always chasing. You get the euphoria sort of upon, or me at least, I would get it even before I started drinking, the anticipation of drinking would give me this kind of burst of energy because my craving was going to be satiated. And then that would last for a drink or two, and then I would spend the rest of the day chasing that unsuccessfully. And so, yeah, for the first months, the first weeks, maybe the first month, not a lot of change, but I was tracking my drinks and there would be small things like, you know, pouring out a beer that I had never done before. Pouring out a beer after half of it or whatever. And then I started to see bigger changes when I started incorporating more alcohol-free days. So I always had alcohol-free days because I only drank when I was alone. I didn't drink when my wife was around. And as a nurse, she was working like 3 or 4 days a week, so not 5 days a week. So I always that was, and I didn't drink around my family. So that I had there were periods in my life in my earlier years when I was single and living alone when I did drink every day, but by this point I wasn't a daily drinker. So I was used to alcohol free days. What I wasn't used to was having a voluntary alcohol free day where it was just me on my own and I'm making the decision right now to not drink, not because I can't drink, but because I don't want to drink. And or because I'm just going to do this. And so I started within the first month, I started incorporating more alcohol free days. Um, and this is one thing that you and I talked about in those early days. I really had to figure out what to do with my time because I didn't know what I liked to do. I started drinking when I was 13 years old. I didn't have any hobbies. My hobby was drinking. And in fact, I was extremely judgmental of people who had real hobbies because I thought that like adults should do one thing. Adults should go to the bar and meet their friends. That's how your adult life should be spent. And um, and so I had to really sort of make myself uncomfortable in those first months trying to find things to do. So I went to events. I mostly events where I could lurk, like not I wasn't like going to a meetup or anything like that, but I would go to events where I could sort of sit in the back and watch whatever was happening. I did a lot of hiking, walking in the woods. I have a dog and I'm, a middle-aged childless lesbian. My dog is obviously the most important thing in my life. So I spent a lot of time with my dog, walking in the woods, making sure that he had a good life, which also makes me have a good life because I like to swim and walk in the woods and do stuff like that. And that's when I started to see real changes when I would have a day, an alcohol-free day on my own, and I would in the evening feeling really good about myself, proud of myself in a way that I hadn't ever, because I was just so convinced that I was a piece of shit because I'd spent my entire life drinking and kind of being a piece of shit.
Yep. That's the mindset we're in. I think when we have alcohol use disorder, looking back, I'm like, I genuinely hated myself. Like,
Oh,
especially
totally.
with the way I treated myself with drinking. Like, a part of me loved to abuse myself and felt like when I
Yeah.
had a horrible hangover, like I deserved it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just such a dark place to be in.
Yeah. And, I got an email from someone today who has an ex who was abusive, physically abusive. And I was never that. You know what I mean? Like, I for sure hurt people, but I didn't hit anybody. I didn't, like the things that I did to myself were, I think, in some ways worse than the things that I did to other people. But I know for people who are further along on the spectrum, that guilt must just be so overwhelming when you can look at your spouse or your kids and you know that you have physically hurt that person. And I think for people in that position, like to ask your family member to go along with you on this TSM journey, I can absolutely see why the beleaguered spouse of someone who has been hitting them or cheating on them or abusing them in other ways, emotionally or physically, I can totally understand why the answer to, I know I need to do something about my drinking, but I need to keep drinking. I can completely understand why the answer to that would be no, absolutely not. Get your ass to an AA meeting because alcohol does so much damage. And I know both you and I suffered and other people suffered because of our drinking. But the spectrum is so, yeah, I assume you never hit your husband. Maybe I'm wrong. You don't seem like a husband beater, but
No, thankfully I did
yeah.
not. I was more of like the embarrass myself and be obnoxious and maybe
Hmm.
say something I shouldn't have said, but I
Oh,
was more of
totally.
the happy drunk, thankfully, not
Yeah.
like the angry drunk.
Angry drunk. Yeah.
Yeah. I love what you said about kind of being willing to feel uncomfortable and get out of your comfort zone to do different things. I think that's one of the big challenges, especially for people like me who are daily drinkers, where, but I mean, to your point, like, you drank as much as you wanted to on the days you could, and to be able to choose not to on those days is a real freeing place to be. But
The,
yeah, go ahead.
the thing that surprises me so much about sobriety is that, because I drank through all of my formative years, I had never done really normal things that people do sober. I had never done these things sober, like go to a concert sober, go to a party sober, go to a dinner party sober, go to a movie sober. I way prefer to go to a movie theater that had a bar.
I would
I
sneak
had
alcohol in.
Oh, totally. I had these things that people all over the world do every day and they do them sober. I had literally never done them. And that was such a huge mental block for me before I started TSM that I could not imagine my life without doing these things a little bit buzzed. I could not imagine it. And the most surprising thing to me about my life now is how easy those things are. I'm not actually uncomfortable at dinner parties or I'm completely comfortable in my skin. I'm completely comfortable having conversations with people. I don't actually need alcohol to do any of those things that I thought I needed it to do. It's shocking to me. And, it's sort of like, yeah, of course I can have a conversation with somebody not drunk. I did it every day, like at work. I wasn't usually drinking at work. Like I did those things. I just thought that as sort of outside of these like narrow, forced sober windows, like work or whatever, that this was impossible. But it's totally fine. At least I'm sure for some people it's not, but for me it's been totally fine.
No, I totally agree. And I was in that exact same state where I mean, I was a daily drinker. I couldn't imagine even one alcohol-free day. And it,
Mm-hmm.
it did require being uncomfortable and pushing myself and, choosing not to drink when I easily could have, because I could just pop a Nal and drink. So you talk about that being a mental block. And I was just wondering if you could describe to somebody, maybe they're in that now. They're like, I know I need to have alcohol-free days. I know I need to change habits, but I'm just not doing the work. Like people on TSM, they're very self-aware. They know what they need to do.
Yes.
Just like we know we need to lose weight, but we're not going to the gym or
Yes.
eating less. So
Yeah.
like, how did you get out of that mental block and start to realize, oh, like there's a whole world outside of
Yeah.
my drinking days?
Just by doing it. Honestly, that was just it. By doing it one time, by saying, I'm going to do this one time. I'm going to try for an alcohol-free day on my own one time. And you know what? If it sucks, I can just drink tomorrow. That's it. And I did it one time and it wasn't that bad. In fact, it was kind of nice and I felt good about myself and I got a good night's sleep and I thought, okay, well, that wasn't that bad. I can try that again. So it was really just repetition and practice and doing the things that non-drinkers do every day without they don't think about the fact that like a day without alcohol seems impossible. They don't think about it, just sort of just really just doing it. And I think for people who are struggling with TSM or who are doing TSM but have hit a plateau, maybe they've seen major reductions in their drinking but they're still drinking every day, they're not totally happy with where they're at, just experiment, try different things. So if if you have some hobby that you like to do, but you only do it drinking, just try one time and see how it is. Because, like, worst case scenario, it's not great and you can start drinking again tomorrow. You can take your pill and you can drink. But it's really those small changes that I think pile up over time and allow you to make bigger changes, bigger structural changes in your life, like sobriety or moderate drinking or whatever it is. But just try. I mean, tell yourself what's the worst that can happen. So
Yeah.
it sucks. Okay, it sucks.
Yeah. I love that you're talking about just the tiny little approach, because sometimes, like, if we're drinking every day and our goal is to drink 2 days a week, we're like, oh my gosh, that's like a mountain. How am I ever going
Yeah,
to get there? Oh, well, I might as well just keep doing what I've always done.
right.
But
Yeah.
I had the mantra of the only way out is through. Like, the only way I'm going to
Yes.
get to the other side is by going through these uncomfortable things.
Yes.
And that really helped me. It just would get me in that mindset, of just like, okay, well, let me be willing to try this hard thing, because
Yeah.
there's no other option to
Right.
get out of this cycle.
Nothing is going to be easier than taking a pill and drinking. Rehab is not going to be easier. going to 90 meetings in 90 days is not going to be easier. It just that was really helpful for me is like realizing the other options here are worse, they're more disruptive, they're more expensive, and I'm gonna have to tell everybody in my life what's really going on. And that was the thing that I was the scaredest of doing was admitting publicly what I knew privately. Yeah, so to me it was just like all of these options are kind of bad, and here's the one option that allows me to keep doing the thing that I want to keep doing. Why would I do anything else?
Yeah, it's so true. So let's talk about that. When you finally did come clean to your wife and people in your life, you went from being someone who the world thought you were sober, but you were secretly drinking, and then nobody knew then that you started TSM. So what was that process like? And by the way, you were also writing about your story under a pseudonym, as I said before. And so you were like public in a way, but people didn't know it was you. So can you talk
Yeah.
about that journey of what that was like for you?
Yeah. So I started a Substack newsletter called, I think, Drinking My Way Sober or something like that under the name Teddy Kennedy. And because he's dead against me. The reason I chose that name is because there's a convention in journalism. You use the initials TK as a placeholder. And so I kept putting TK in the whatever when I was writing this to refer to myself. And then it fit. Um, so yeah, I published this. I was working on this Substack, and I really was not getting any traction on the Substack. I had, I think, 200 readers at the most. I eventually just stopped doing it. It turns out I need I need people to read my work to be motivated to do it. But that was helpful in terms of the structure because I could think of this as like this isn't just something I'm doing for myself. I'm doing this as a work of journalism. And this was also again during COVID. And so having something, having writing's my vocation. And so to be able to sort of turn this into a journalistic project, I think was also motivating to me because I had deadlines and like I have to do this. I have my 200 readers are expecting this every week or whatever. Um, and then so I decided to sort of come clean. It was over maybe like a year and a half after I actually had my last drink. I decided to tell my wife. And part of the reason was because, I had been going to these AA meetings and I'd been seeing people just suffering. And I just felt like I started to feel like all of the guilt that I felt when I was in active addiction, I was still feeling guilty, but not about my drinking. I was feeling guilty because I knew I had found a solution, something that worked for me, and I was unwilling to tell other people about it under my own name. So I had done what I could sort of anonymously, but I didn't get anywhere. And, I have a fair number of readers and I have a podcast a lot of people listen to. I have a lot of followers on Twitter and places like that. And I just felt guilty. Like I was seeing the effects of alcoholism and the people around me. And I wasn't willing to say, like, hey, I have something that might help you here because I was ashamed and I didn't want people to know my secret. And that's kind of what did it was and I think it was sort of always inevitable that I was going to eventually come to terms with, like, this is what you have to do. But it was really scary. Telling my wife was not that hard. Telling my family was really hard. And honestly, I might never have done it except I got a book deal. And it was like, I wrote the book, I had a publisher, and I told my family, like, I have to tell you something. I was secretly drinking, I got sober, and I wrote a fucking self-help book. And I think that was probably the most shocking part to them was that I wrote a self-help book. It was completely off-brand for me. Nobody in my life would have ever expected me to write self-help. And everybody was great about it. Surprised for sure, but great about it.
That's so good. And it's not like your typical self-help book. Like it reads more, I mean, I see like a memoir. I don't know. I love the book. I read it
Oh,
so
thank you.
quickly. It's really good.
Yeah, it's a weird balance to write of like it is self-help, it's memoir, it's journalism, and the journalism part was kind of the most difficult part of writing the book because I learned that a lot of the things that I thought that I knew about naltrexone and TSM were wrong. So like some of the things I'd written about in the newsletter and the Substack were wrong. So I took it all offline because I didn't want to, spread misinformation. But I just learned so much, particularly from Joe Volpicelli, um, and other clinicians and researchers that I spoke to, and other people who've done TSM, that it really changed my whole thinking about naltrexone and how it works and kind of what's behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I just commend you for, being willing to report with that truthful, accurate lens and not just falling into like a paradigm of like the some people in the TSM community, God bless them, they can be a little bit dogmatic and it kind of
Yeah,
reminds me of the people in the AA community who are
totally.
like, this is the only way to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think that I experienced that as well. And I had just absorbed a lot from sort of the online community that any group of people who's seen success with this is going to be really passionate about it. But the truth is, like, TSM is not particularly well studied. There are naltrexone is very well studied, and there are double-blind randomized controlled trials of targeted use of naltrexone. But if you just like look up the Sinclair method in PubMed, you're not going to find anything.
mhm.
Um, and that doesn't, I don't think that matters that much to like the average reader who's interested in this. But as a journalist, I had an obligation to represent the data really accurately. And so I think there's a tension with self-help if like I want people to have the most accurate information possible, but there's so many nuances when it comes to the actual studies. It's a lot easier just to say like this works for 78% of people, which is something that uh, David Sinclair's his early lab studies, they had like a 78% reduction, or 78% of the patients in his early studies showed a significant reductions in drinking. That's great. That doesn't hold up. Like the FDA isn't going to approve a drug based on a study of that size with that design.
Yeah.
And that was a complicating factor for me. It's a lot easier to repeat these sort of kind of platitudes that you'll often see in the groups. 78%, 78%. And the 78% might be true, but it just isn't, it's not like his studies weren't like, they weren't sort of rigorous enough for kind of evidence-based medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I think like I said, my stance on it has definitely evolved, especially since starting Thrive and working with Dr. Volpicelli and just
Yeah.
learning about all these different ways to use naltrexone. And I don't think that's bad news. And I think if
No,
naltrexone and targeted use via the Sinclair method was studied more, we would probably produce those same results. And the reason I
I
say
think you're
that is
right. Yeah.
Dr. V and I have been doing a informal study where people are responding to a survey where they're
Cool.
telling us about their experience with TSM and targeted use. And
Yeah.
that's about what we're seeing. Like 80%
Yeah.
of people get better, especially those who have craving for alcohol.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. Yes. And I mean, he's so good at distilling the information in a way that even, I was a lit major, even I could understand it, but there's so many complexities um, in the data. And yeah, I think oftentimes it's just those of us who are proponents of this. Um, there's like an art to sort of simplifying the data, but also representing it honestly.
yeah. Yeah, I like right now, I would love it if we could get an FDA approval of targeted naltrexone, like the
Hmm.
Sinclair method. Because right now, for people that know, the on-label way to take it is daily. Typically, doctors prescribe it with abstinence,
Yeah.
and harm reduction is still very much poo-pooed in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
mainstream treatment
And
world.
some like last time I got a prescription. Um, I didn't actually fill it, but I asked my doctor for a prescription in naltrexone because I needed to see the label. And she knew that I was doing TSM. I have a great doctor. She knew what I was doing. And so when I got the label back, it said take it 1 hour before drinking. But she knew what I was doing. She knew the protocol. And I never actually I never took it, but yeah, it's like covered by insurance. And I'm like, okay, this is worth my copay. I really need this label.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you were first prescribed it in 2018, you didn't know about TSM, right? You just took it the one time and
No, I did know about it. So I learned about it from the Gabrielle Glasser article in the Atlantic that came out in 2015. So I took that, I like printed it out and I took it to my doctor and I said like, and she'd never heard of TSM. She'd heard of naltrexone, but she was like, all right, here's the prescription, do what you want. And so I don't still have that bottle. It probably said take it daily. Or I don't remember though. But I was always intending on doing the Sinclair method. It took 4 more years for me to get into a position where I was like willing to totally dive in. I after I read that article, I'm sure you've read that
Mhm.
one.
And by the way, it's called like The Irrationality of Alcoholics Anonymous in the
Yeah.
Atlantic. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's mostly about that, but there's a fairly short passage about David Sinclair and the Sinclair method. And after I read that, I was like, oh, miracle cure. This is going to be it. And then, like, at the slightest barrier, when I didn't like the way it made me feel, I was like, no, that's not, never mind.
And I think that's an important part of your story because many people, I mean, we have to be ready. We have to want this for ourselves. If we're not
Yes.
like, I mean, like you said, you had to make yourself uncomfortable. You had to take the pill. You had to endure the side effects. There's work to be done. It's more than just popping a pill and kicking back and you're
Hmm.
cured, you know?
Yeah.
So a lot of people are in that space where they get it and they're like, nah, I'm not ready, you know?
Do you think this would have worked for you when you were like 25?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Maybe. I wanted to fix my drinking for years before I learned about TSM, probably for like 4 to 5 years before I learned about it. So maybe, but I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't thought about that. I
I
was
don't,
so
yeah,
motivated when I got on TSM, though. I
yeah,
was like
yeah,
over it.
totally. Yeah, I've spoken to so many people who've done it. I'm sure you've spoken to many more than I have. I don't know that I've spoken to anyone sort of under the age of 30. I just don't know if this, I mean, I do not think this would have worked for me at 25 because I was even though I knew I had a drinking problem, I was so committed to the buzz. And because my social circles were such heavy drinking, I was in such heavy drinking communities that um, I just don't think it would have worked at that time in my life. There are going to be young people who are there are young people who get sober in AA. There are young people who are aware and motivated to quit. And I think this could work for it. I don't think I was one of them. But yeah, I mean, have you talked to many young people who've done TSM?
You know, it's interesting you say that because we do have a couple people in our program that are under 30 that have had success with the treatment for sure. I can think of two at the top of my head. There may be more. But what I see a lot that I always hate when I see it coming, a parent reaching out for their 20 something child who they really want to do TSM. Maybe the person gets started on the Sinclair method, but the parent wants it more than the kid. And to your point, they are
Yes.
just not ready. And it's like pulling teeth to try to get them to take the medication, to show up to their
It's
coaching
not going to
session.
work. Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking because I can see it coming from a mile away when I get that call from the parent and they're really, hopeful for this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
where's like, does your child, want this? And
Yeah.
I see that almost to the point where I don't want to help somebody with this method unless they are the ones signing themselves
Yeah.
up and doing it,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
So, yeah. And part of my story too is, but until I met my now husband, being with him really was like the nail in the coffin to show me how bad my drinking problem was because he drinks, but he has like no problem at all. I've never even seen him drunk.
Yeah.
And before that, I was always dating men that were matching me with my
Yeah.
drinking. And so I don't know if naltrexone would have worked if I was with someone who was drinking just as much or more than I was. I don't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of same. My now wife was one of the only people I dated who was like not a barfly.
It makes you want to be a better person, right?
Yeah.
It's
Because
really
you don't want to get
beautiful.
broken up with. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, okay, this is just a mirror to how
Yeah.
gross I am.
Totally.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a good conversation. I feel like we could keep talking about this. What is a takeaway you want, like with this book?
Hmm.
Is there one thing you want people to take away from it? And understanding there's going to be people reading it from all walks of life, whether they know about naltrexone and TSM or not. Yeah, what do you want people to take away?
The biggest takeaway is just that there are options out there that are not, and TSM is not the only one. And I think we're getting to an interesting place in the culture that is almost a reversion to an earlier place. Like until 12 steps in AA kind of took over the culture and became this really hegemonic force where public health advisors, doctors, drug counselors were giving people mostly one, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but for the most part, it was seen as there was one path forward outside of AUD, and that was abstinence only, probably 12 steps, maybe including rehab, but probably 12 steps. And that's so that, it's AA was just so successful at sort of taking over the culture that it's been this really dominant force culturally, politically, legally. Um, but if you look at the history of addiction treatment, there have been a ton of different treatments, some of which are bizarre, some of which were bizarre and worked. And I think we're moving into that. We're moving into a place where there's a greater, well, what I would like to see is moving into a greater acknowledgement that there's not one path out for everybody. And maybe the thing that works is TSM. Maybe the thing that works is some sort of aversion treatment. Like I talk to people who had really good success with antabuse. Um, there are treatments like, or there are drugs like these GLP-1s that people are seeing really interesting results with. I have sort of mixed feelings about those because from what I can understand, they work as long as you take them.
Hmm.
They do quiet the sort of voice in your head, whether it's for food or for alcohol, the sort of constant chatter of desire. But if you stop taking the drug, from what I have heard, the chatter comes back. And naltrexone, obviously, if you stop drinking, the chatter is, if you reach extinction and stop drinking, sort of, from my experience, the chatter is gone. But I think that like expanding the options, thinking of addiction as not a monolith, but having individualized treatments. So the big takeaway from this. Like I hope that people try TSM if they're a good fit for it. Everybody is not going to be a good candidate for this. This is one of the things I learned through you and through Joe Volpicelli. Um, Depending on sort of the reward you get from alcohol, depending on your own physiology, some people it's going to work, for some people it's not. But even if TSM doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean that there's only one other path. There are a fuck ton of options here, and I just think that that's where we should be headed, is like broadening the conversation about what's possible.
Yeah, 100%. And that's just like, I mean, common sense, right?
Totally,
We should be
totally.
presenting a menu of options. And even though I'm a huge advocate for TSM, that's what I know, that's what worked for me. I'm not here to be like, just keep going. If you're a year in and it's not working, maybe it is time to try something else. I don't know. But I see comments from people who are like, oh, I've been on the medication for months and I'm still drinking too much. And I always have like 1,000 more questions just to understand, are they doing it correctly? Are they putting in the work alongside the medication? Because it's more than just,
Hmm.
popping a pill. And I was humbled to that fact a couple months in. I was like, cool, this medicine's going to help me drink less, but it just opened up a whole world of things I needed to work on and
Yeah,
habits I had to change and things like that.
yeah. It's deceptively simple.
Yeah, but not always easy.
Right.
Um, have you received a couple more questions for you that are coming up for you? I want to ask you, have you received any backlash from people since going public with your story?
Nothing that I've paid attention to. I assume that when the book comes out, there'll be some backlash from 12 steppers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of prepared for that. I think it's inevitable. I really took pains in this book to make it clear that I don't think AA is wrong. I just don't think it's right for everybody. It was not right for me. It is right for so many people. I think it's a really remarkable program, and the fact that it's free and almost global makes it even more remarkable. I really don't have any issues with it. But like anything else, TSM, AA, there's some diehard, really dogmatic adherents to these programs who just think that there's only one path,
Mm-hmm.
and that's X. So I haven't got that pushback yet. I'm curious to see what will happen. And I think one thing that I'm also anticipating is that people will be like, well, you didn't, sure, maybe you're not drinking, but there must be something inside you, that there's a root of your drinking. You didn't get to the root of the issue. You didn't do this deep moral inspection. You didn't have to, it's like the easy way out. And which my response to that is, yeah, addiction. Yeah, yeah, you're right. I didn't do a deep moral inventory. I just got better and I don't drink anymore and now I'm a better person. And I just think there's this idea, that we all have something deep inside of us that is causing us to drink. Maybe it's trauma or depression or anxiety and or something else, some hole that you need to fill. And I just don't think that's true for me. I'm sure it's true for some people. And Claudia, in fact, changed her opinion on this. This was really interesting to me. She did that very famous and really good TED Talk in like 2006 or whatever. I can't remember what it was called, but
How I
um,
Overcame Alcoholism by Claudia
yeah,
Christian.
yeah. And she relapsed, and after she relapsed, she realized that there actually were things that she needed to work on. She developed more of a spiritual practice. She did have a lot of trauma in her life connected with alcohol. She writes about it in her memoir. And she told me she sort of wished that she could take that back from her TED Talk, this idea that she just had this physical addiction and that it had a physical solution rather than more of a spiritual or I don't know, emotional solution as well. But my experience is not that. I had the risk factors for AUD, a family history of addiction. I started drinking young and I drank a lot. Not trauma. I don't have much trauma in my background, but other than that, I do have the risk factors and I drank a lot and I think I drank myself into alcoholism because I really liked it. And once the monkey was off of my back, my life just improved. Not, and it really didn't take much work for my life to improve, like in small ways, exercise, eating right, paying my bills on time. When I was in my heaviest drinking days, if I got a bill, I would just not check my mail. You know what I mean? And now I get a bill and I pay it on time. It's just stuff like that that just, it's these sort of the snowball effects, the same way that ADU has this sort of snowball effect of sobriety or having control over your drinking. And so I don't think that it's very helpful when people sort of maintain that we must do these deep moral inventories and there's a hole inside of us. I don't think it's helpful because it's not true for everybody. It's another barrier to sobriety or to getting control of your drinking. And the other thing is for people who do have that hole or that trauma or those other comorbidities, it's a lot easier to address those other problems, whatever damage you have done in your life, if your alcohol use is under control.
I mean, just you said so many important things there, and I completely agree because there's this pervasive message out there that trauma is the reason people have addiction, and certainly that is true in some cases. But I started drinking because it was fun, and then
Totally.
I learned to love it even more
Yeah.
and would use it to celebrate and to cope. And same for me. There was work and therapy. I had to make some changes in my life when I progressed on TSM because I felt my life was built from a foundation of someone who had an alcohol addiction. And so
Yeah.
change my job, change my friends, change my hobbies, habits. So, there was work to be done, but it's interesting because I've done some trauma healing work in the past year or two, but like that's completely unrelated to my alcohol problem. And it hasn't triggered me to want to drink or anything, but I'm just saying that because I got completely healed or cured of my alcohol addiction. And then years later, I'm dealing with some like, unconscious behaviors or beliefs that I have just aren't serving me and kind of working
Mm-hmm.
through those now. But it wasn't something that had to be resolved before I could
Right.
resolve my drinking.
Right. And resolving the drinking problem is going to make resolving those other things just easier. Whatever your problem is, alcohol will not make your problem better.
Yeah.
Nothing. Unless there's like a cut on your leg and you need to pour some on it. Like alcohol does not make problems better.
And I would try talk therapy before TSM, but when we talk about the craving, it was just like you going to AA and wanting to drink afterward. It was like the
Yes.
craving. I was 6 months sober one time before TSM and I just wanted to drink every
Totally.
day.
Yeah, I did therapy. I did individual therapy for years and it never helped. I mean, I liked my therapist, and like it was good conversations, but it really never helped address the drinking. And my therapist knew more than I did that the base issue was drinking, but she was like trying to teach like tapping on your forehead and all of this other stuff. if tapping on your forehead works for you, fine. It does not help
Again,
me.
who are we to knock, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you
Yeah.
mentioned the Claudia thing too, because I've heard her say that a lot, where she wishes she would have included more of, the difficulties. And if you read her memoir, Babylon Confidential, you do see some of the traumatic things she
Oh
talks
yeah.
about those.
Oh yeah.
Um, but I'm like, I wouldn't change a thing about that talk because it was
Hmm.
so compelling, so relatable, so convincing, and really completely challenged the narrative of what we've just been talking about, what we've kind of believed alcohol addiction is and how to overcome it, which is like this, character defect, and you've got to get to the root of it. And she just totally challenged that with the
Yeah.
TED Talk. So I love it. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
don't change a thing. I just watched it the
Totally.
other day again and I was like on fire. I'm like, she did
Yeah.
such a good job with that.
She did. She did. Yes.
Um, Curious to ask, this is your first book, right?
Yes. First and only. I'm not doing this again.
No? What does it feel like you've been a writer for a long time. What does it feel like to have your first book coming out?
You know, this is probably not the answer that anybody wants to hear, but it kind of feels like nothing. I don't know. I just like I don't have like I was going to do a book tour. I canceled the book tour because I just moved and I'm just like I have too much going on right now. So there's not a lot of fanfare around this. And so it feels really kind of low key. And that is it's been a like it's been kind of disappointing at how difficult it is to get people enthused about this.
Hmm.
And I thought by now, like, I thought I was going to have a lot more press around this, and I've gotten very little. So
Hmm.
people in the TSM community know about it, people who follow my work know about it, but I thought this was going to be, I had, I think, outsized expectations about what I thought I was going to be like on The View. I thought it was going to be really easy to sell this because it's a fucking solution for out. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it seems like a no-brainer, but it's been really there've been like very little interest from um
Does that come once the book is published though? It's not like it won't ever happen even after it's published, right?
it could come after it's published. And I think and that's sort of what I'm telling myself is that, it doesn't need to happen before. It can happen later, but it's such a crapshoot. Like any book, the average book sells almost no copies. All it takes to get to be like a bestseller in this country is, I think, selling something like 5,000 books in the first week. So books just don't sell. And because I'm a writer, almost everybody I know has written a book, and very few of them have like made a sort of difference in their lives or sort of bigger picture. There's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, writing a book doesn't change your life. I thought that mine would be different because we have 30 million people in this country who fall somewhere on the spectrum of AUD, so there's a huge market for this, and it really just has not gotten much attention.
Hmm.
So that's been so it feels like nothing, honestly. I feel like it's going to come out on September 30th, and I think I will wake up and go to work like any other day. And yeah. So my hope is that, that this has legs and that it catches on at some point, but it hasn't happened. And
Yeah.
I've been like self-promotion is really hard for me. So I have like emailed every person I know with some sort of platform or poll to basically beg me to have them on their show, and it hasn't worked. And yeah, so I don't know, maybe nothing will happen at all. We'll see.
It's just so interesting you're saying that because I feel like that's the energy behind TSM in general. Like
Yes.
everyone who
Why?
learns about it, they're like, why didn't I hear about this years ago? Why isn't it more well known? And it's
Yeah,
just been this like slog to raise awareness. And even still, I think
totally.
less than 4% of people are even offered naltrexone who could benefit from it. There's just this major
Yes.
resistance against it.
Totally. Yes. And and I thought that I hoped that this book would be kind of the thing. But I don't know that it's gonna happen. I'm like lowering my expectations by the day. Maybe
Well,
this will be the podcast. Maybe
yeah,
this will be
right.
the one that changes
It's
everything.
maybe, yeah, maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised. I know I'm going to promote the heck out of it and
Well,
send
thank
people
you.
to it, and we never know what's going to happen
It's
after the
true.
fact.
It's true.
Um, yeah, I'm really excited about it, especially because it's we need a new book in the TSM world,
Hmm.
and it's so well written. It presents the facts, it presents your story, it gives tips for people on the method. You interview real stories. Yeah, you just did an amazing job, and I commend you for all of the effort, blood, sweat, tears you put into writing this because I know it was harder than you thought it was going to be.
Well, thank you, Katie. And I got to piggyback off of your work, so thank you for that.
Absolutely, my pleasure. We're all, as Dr. Volpicelli says, this is like a grassroots effort. Like doctors, for the most
Yes,
part, are not enthusiastic about this treatment. Researchers aren't, and so it's those of us that have had success with it and are demanding it. And yeah, I think the future's bright for the Sinclair method. The search trends on naltrexone continue to increase, so
good.
I'm excited about the future. And thank you for writing this book. Any last words from you before we wrap up?
No, just thank you for the work that you've done. You've been so instrumental, I think, in this community, and I really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I always feel weird when people thank me because it's the work is deeply meaningful to me. Like you talked about early in your AUD days, you just kind of had jobs that, could have that could allow you to have your AUD basically. That's what I did
Yeah.
for so long. And I longed for purpose and meaning in my work. And I feel like I have that. So I honestly feel really blessed to be able to do this work. So thank you, Katie. Katie, one last thing I did want to ask you, where can people find you and your work and the book? I know you have a podcast, you're a writer, so tell us how people can find you.
Yeah, so the book is available for pre-order now. There are links on my website, which is drinkyourwaysober dot, I believe it's .com. I need to look this up. It's available on Amazon and indie bookstores, I hope. And then I have a podcast called Blocked and Reported. Those are kind of the best ways to get in touch with me.
Okay, cool. And is it going to be on Audible, by the way?
Yes, there's a like awesome reader or like yes, book reader, audio narrator who reached out to me specifically because she was interested in this, and so we got her to do it. She did a great job.
All right. Well, check out the book. It is on Amazon. It'll be out September 30th, but you can pre-order it now. So please do so. Highly, highly recommend. It's such a good book, whether you're on TSM or not. It's just a great story. So thank you so much again, Katie.
Thank you.